Okay, let's just dive right in, shall we? Today, we're going deep on one of history's most feared Viking leaders, Ivar the Boneless. But here's the twist. We're not just looking at a warrior. We're asking if it's possible he used pure brutality as his own terrifying art form.
This quote, it really sets the stage. It challenges us to look past simple, mindless savagery and see if there was something more calculated, maybe even performative, in all that violence.
And that really gets you thinking, right? Can something as horrifying as warfare actually be a medium for expression? It's a heavy question, but let's see if we can unpack it.
So first things first, we've got to shatter the stereotype we all have in our heads when someone says the word Viking. You know the one I'm talking about, the horned helmet, which by the way, totally a myth, the wild-eyed berserker just charging into battle, all rage, no brain, basically a blunt instrument of destruction. But what if that's not even close to the whole story? Okay, so let's try to get inside the mind of the man himself. Who was the strategist hiding behind that terrifying legend? On one hand, you have the myth, this mindless brute. But the reality? It couldn't be more different. Ivar the Boneless was a cunning strategist. The sagas don't describe a simple fighter. They describe a brilliant tactician, a leader who was always thinking 3 moves ahead. He was the chess master, not just a piece on the board.
Think about his nickname, the Boneless. It probably points to some kind of physical condition. But instead of letting that be a weakness, he flipped the script completely. He turned it into a psychological weapon. Imagine seeing this guy carried into battle on a shield. It's unsettling, almost supernatural. He weaponized his own reputation, creating this aura of unpredictability that had his enemies terrified before a single sword was even drawn.
And we're not talking about small-time raids here. The sheer scale of his ambition was just immense. The great heathen army wasn't just a band of pirates. It was a massive, coordinated force that swept across England with terrifying precision. This was a grand, orchestrated campaign of conquest, and you better believe, Ivar was one of its masterminds. So, he's a master strategist. But how did that actually look on the battlefield? Well, this is where we see what you could almost call a choreography of carnage. One of his go-to moves was pure tactical genius. Picture this, he'd pretend to retreat. Now that takes incredible discipline from an army, but it worked. He'd lure an overconfident enemy right into a trap, and the second they were exactly where he wanted them, boom, encirclement and annihilation. It was like a deadly 3-act play, and he was the director. And that's the key right there. For Ivar, a battle wasn't just a fight to be won, it was a performance. A calculated, chilling performance designed for a very specific audience, his enemies, with the ultimate goal of creating maximum psychological shock and awe. All right, now let's zoom in on the details, on what you might call his brutal signature, the finishing touches on his canvas of war. It was calculated chaos. To an outsider, it might have looked like random, senseless destruction, but it wasn't, not at all. There was a deliberate pattern, like brushstrokes. He'd choose his targets with care, using terror over here to paralyze the will to fight over there. Every single brutal act served a larger strategic purpose. And then, there's the one thing he's most infamous for, his signature move, the Blood Eagle. This was so much more than just an execution. It was a ritual, a horrifying, symbolic act designed to be talked about, to have stories spread like wildfire. It was the horrific finishing touch on his masterpiece of terror, guaranteeing his name would be whispered in fear for centuries. You see, Ivar's legacy wasn't written on parchment. It was written in the laments of his victims. The smoking ruins he left in his wake, you could call that his enduring gallery. And the fear he carved into the hearts of entire kingdoms, well, that was the lasting emotional impact of his work. So, why are we still talking about a Viking warlord over 1,000 years later? Because, believe it or not, the principles behind his art of fear are absolutely timeless. The parallels to our own world are kind of spooky, aren't they? Cultivating a terrifying reputation, that's just an ancient form of information and disinformation warfare. Orchestrated campaigns of terror are the clear ancestors of modern shock and awe tactics. His methods absolutely echo in the strategies we see today. And it's not just in military textbooks either. He is a massive figure in our pop culture. He inspires characters in huge TV shows and movies, he's the subject of novels, and yeah, military historians still study his campaigns. His brutal art continues to fascinate and horrify us.
Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why are we so drawn to these dark, complicated figures? Maybe it's because they completely mess with our simple definitions of good and evil. They force us to see the cold, hard intelligence that can exist inside profound cruelty.
When you boil it all down, his psychological footprint was massive, and it went in two directions. For his enemies, he left behind a legacy of fear that lasted for generations. But for his own people, he forged a legend, a source of incredible pride, and a tool of intimidation that served the Vikings for years to come.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling thought to chew on. If you can find strategy, performance, and a lasting emotional impact in the brutal campaigns of Ivar the Boneless, where else in the darkest corners of our history might we find the fingerprints of art?